And when we first got married, we did both.
Yeah.
And then we got our paperwork caught up. And so by the time we did, it was like a year later. And then the state of Vermont said they would recognize my name change at marriage, but not his. So then we realized people were always dropping the Bassard and just calling us Lundy. And that wasn't the point. So we're like, well, if we have to pay a lawyer to legally change it, then we'll change it. And so we came up with one syllable of each and a hyphen in the middle, and it seemed like such a lovely and equitable idea at the time. And really, I strongly advise all people never get a hyphen in your name, because
Oh, I know.
your passport never mentions your
As an apostrophe
plane
person,
ticket
I
and all that.
totally
I mean,
agree.
it's-
Yes.
it's- At the time, I was 21 and like a fairly ardent feminist, and I thought it was a really great idea. In retrospect, not so much, but I'm stuck with. My husband has actually said recently, we should just get rid of it. We'll just go back to your name. And I'm like, no, that was 37 years ago, like too late.
All right, so let's go ahead then, Jeff.
All right. All right. For the record, Representative John O'Brien. This is House Ag. Today I'm introducing H 477, short form bill. Where's the official? And have an act relating to forest management harvest on state forest lands. As with most of my bills this year that I'm introducing, what I'm really after is just to begin conversations in a sort of formal way, in this committee, especially on just things we talk about all the time in here. And so this one came out of our field trip to Little River State Park and that harvest there. And when we heard things like, this cut was supposed to happen in 2014. There's certain staffing challenges. I think Jed's brought up, Representative Lipsky's brought up, maybe how do we speed that up? Do we actually start using maybe even private foresters if there's not capacity at FPR to do some of the forester work on these parcels? And then if you look at the scale also, we have 350,000 acres of state land, most of it forest. And, what cut was 100 acres, something like that. It just struck me that if the state was enrolled in current use, they would have got kicked out by now because the management of, it's taken them what?
They weren't following the management.
Exactly. Right. Or they were so behind, right? Or it'd be like my farm with 200 acres going out and cutting, a 10-foot by 10-foot, piece of property and saying that's it for this year. So I know there's politically, it's really hard to do timber harvest now, given the push for don't cut any trees in certain sectors. But listening to the logger there too about how if there were more harvest, and I think they can align with Audubon or with other groups, it would help loggers a lot, because if they knew, I have a job with the state for the next 6 years, then they could afford those, $800,000 forwarders. So this bill's just about to get that conversation going here. Like, what could we do? Because FPR is sort of our partner in a lot of ways, and they manage really fabulous forest. I think they do a great job. It's just, can we speed it up? Can we create more harvest, in a sustainable way that everybody from Audubon to state representatives thinks great.
I think part of it starts with, how many acres do they own, which is somewhere in can't remember if it's 374 or 347,000 acres.
Around that, yeah.
And then looking at how many acres in management is in preservation, because we know there's some of that, mountaintops and steeps and wetlands and whatnot. So then it's coming down to how many acres do you have that you want to manage? And then it's coming up with goals, and then how do we achieve these goals? And I like your thinking on this. There was another great harvest up in Bill Sladek Wildlife Management Area this year.
What town's that in?
Norton.
Okay.
Norton, Holland. And they pulled a lot of timber out of there, which was great. But to your point, to help the industry plan, And then maybe, do we have, if we have a sustainable cut, is there room to create another avenue for the end product, whether it be, the mill product? Can we get another mill set up in state to help this industry flourish and then, tag it with that Vermont grown label? And,
Biodegradable though.
well,
Yeah.
it's carbon sequestration in its best form when you turn lumber into boards. And then you build homes with them or furniture, durable products that are gonna be around a long time. And it punches it hits all the keys, John, except for the people that don't wanna cut a single tree, but it's education and outreach that this is why we need to do this. Because a young forest extracts more carbon than an old forest. We've heard that testimony here. So it's good stuff. Tell you went to Harvard.
Well, and it's just our conversations about forests. It's interesting that the former commissioner, Mike Snyder, had this great line once when we were talking about the same thing. And he said, even a clear cut is still a forest. The real danger here is that fragmentation is development and it never goes back to forest. But, right, a clear cut, if done
Correctly.
managed correctly, you create new growth, you sequester a lot of carbon, you perhaps, a lot of these middle-aged forests, they don't have really great timber in them, and it's just going to be there a long time. So you can speed up or slow down, even this new forest management. What is it? It's like 0.2% of current use or something really small. It's still under management. It's just a different way of thinking about forest.
And diversity of wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
So this is fairly straightforward. And what I think we should do is maybe move on to the second bill because it's less straightforward.
Which one is that? It's 75?
475, yeah.
Establishing an
Yeah,
equitable.
Rachel will have something to say about this too. All right, so H 475, establishing an equitable pricing system for the milk, for the milk production, for milk production. This bill came out of a few years ago. I served on, there was a dairy task force created here that had Senate and House representation. Mike O'Grady was our legislative counselor, and it was exploring mostly with Senator Bobby Starr and Dan Smith, who was the sort of the genius behind the Northeast Dairy Compact, about looking into what could we do to what legislatively maybe we could do to make the dairy world in Vermont more stable. And one of the ideas was a tiered pricing system, which you've mentioned, Richard, a couple times in certain states. Maine was the most, we used Maine a lot as an example. And this bill would create something similar to Maine, which the whole idea is that you create a system of fees or tax on milk that, and at this in Maine, they do it more at the consumer level. This would do it on the handler level. So the Agrimark, Habits, and DFAs, and Commonwealth and Brattleboro. Because in Vermont right now, most as opposed to when we were growing up, and a lot of our fluid milk went to the Boston market. Now a lot of it stays in state and is made into value-added things, cheeses, yogurts, etc. And so if we could create some revenue from milk that's processed in Vermont and create a fund for that and have it eventually flow back to dairy farmers. And I've added in this even perhaps fund some of the universal school meals because there's that connection there, I think, with nutrition, that it would create some sort of safety net in the future of dairy farming, because right now, dairy farmer, we haven't heard much about it. We had a crisis in the organic dairy a couple of years ago. And before that, it was a crisis in the conventional dairy. And that's cyclical. It's going to come back, and we're going to lose, we're going to be down to 100 farms probably if any of us stay here long enough. So the thing about this is it's counter cyclical. So whatever the federal milk market order price is, that goes up and down. So when that price is good and goes up, the amount of money flowing to dairy farmers from this tiered program would be less. And so when things are bad, that price would go up and create that safety net for dairy farmers here. And that's pretty much what it does.
Fairly sure they have this pricing dynamic in Massachusetts and perhaps Connecticut. And they're taxing our milk
Yeah, you mentioned.
to support their farmers. Maine's a milk deficit state, so they're definitely doing it. There's been ideas kicked around that not just on the processor level, John, but maybe in taxing all things that try to call themselves milk that aren't milk.
Right.
And either they'll play or they'll call almond milk nut juice.
Right. Beverage. Yeah.
That's the contention I have with the USDA not stepping up and doing their due diligence.
Yeah.
Because milk is a product created from a mammal that has had one or more babies. That's the definition of milk.
We defined it, right? About 4 years ago, I think Mike O'Grady wrote a letter, right? And we
Yeah.
sent an angry letter,
Yeah, and anyway,
a lacteal secretion of the milk.
yeah,
Yeah.
so this is something we'd have to look at. Dan Smith was masterful with Bobby Starr in creating the Northeast Dairy Compact, which, wouldn't it be nice to get some of that Oregon money from Tillamook that is now cracked into our market?
Yeah. And that's what, I suspect if we ask who won't like this, I mean, I would say the handlers will push back against this just because they'll say this is adding a cost onto their, cost of doing business. And that creates, even more challenges with the Tillamooks, et cetera, and the Kerry Gold or whatever they are. So
The money works its way back to the farmers.
So in Maine, for example, they have to, I think, because maybe of interstate commerce clause and various accounting, the money that comes in through the tiered program has to go into the general fund, and then you create a separate appropriations that it comes out and would go to the agency. You can't specifically have it, I think, go directly to farmers. And so there's sort of this agreement in Maine that it flows that way. And I think in Maine, because they're a very deficit state, some years there's not enough money and the general fund actually has to make up that shortfall. So that's probably not very popular.
New York is such a big dairy city as well. What anything you need to be over there?
I think we have to pay some of the New York farmers perhaps for this too, because it's milk that's being, processed in the state. But I think
Under your scheme.
right, I think so.
Right.
And it's not much milk that flows in from New York. But also I think there's a sense at the moment anyway, what's I think strong about this is that I don't think the processors here who are using Vermont made milk for those value added things are going to go to Syracuse or Buffalo or wherever to bring milk here to replace it just to avoid the handling fee. So I think we're pretty safe with what dairy farms we do have here. There's value that they're local.
Yeah. Fairlight has got a big plant.
Out there now.
Come online out
Yeah.
of New York. And then there's a massive cheese making facility going in upstate New York.
Is that Kraft?
No.
Adams Kraft.
I can't remember the name. And milk from New York won't flow east ever again when those come online. Matter of fact, milk from New York, from Vermont, may for the first time ever
Go that
flow
way.
west instead of just south. So these are exciting times. I wish we had this in place because these are gonna be exciting times this year because of what's going on down that place.
Yeah.
600 miles south of us.
Well, you said you were set up for the best year ever,
We were
and
supposed to, and then now class 3 is taking a $2 hit.
but that's, the dairy, it's so volatile, the whole dairy industry, that anything we could do in this building to create some stability would be a good thing.
When you talk about a tiered system, can you talk more about that? How would it be tiered?
I think it's tiered so that it creates production levels and to some extent so that the smaller farmers would get, per cow, I think, a slightly better percentage of a return than the bigger ones. So sort of like we did during COVID, I think, with the payouts, there were tiers as far as how many, thousands or millions of pounds of milk you produced a year. The payout was different, and it's somewhat similar to that.
And that's how they do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
What area is the Northeast Area Compact? What states?
It doesn't exist anymore, but because Wisconsin, I mean, politically in the US Senate, I think, but mostly I think Wisconsin and Midwest farmers or the dairy world out there did not like it because they wanted more of a Wild West scenario at that time. And so they voted it down. So it lasted, 8 years, not even maybe.
34.
Yeah, not very long after. It took 8 years, 10 years to create, and then lasted 4 years.
This is around late 90s and early.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Would this work in sort of on top of the existing forgetting the name of it, the insurance.
Dairy margin coverage.
Yes,
Yeah.
the margin coverage program.
Right. So it's, I mean, similar in that's given some stability, I think,
Yeah.
to the wild swings in milk prices.
Not intended to replace that.
No, I don't think so.
Farms
That's a
could
federal
still
program.
participate in that if they wanted
Right,
to.
exactly. So even to have two programs might be better. And I think it's based, similar to that, is somewhat based on the cost of production. And there are just many years now where the cost of producing a gallon of milk, it costs more to produce it than you get for it.
Other,
Mike O'Grady, since he was also the pledge council on this whole, I mean, he knows his sort of tiered system too, and we could have Dan Smith in who knows all about this too.
yes,
It's definitely complicated and would require a lot of vetting, but it just seemed worthwhile to, because we took it, I think, to the Milk Commission here and they sort of just tabled the whole idea, but I think it'd be worth continuing the discussion. Because dairy farms look at, every year we come back here, we lose another 100, and it just feels like we're gonna have just Richard and Heather are gonna be our only two dairy farmers left.
no, it'll be Heather and Cameron Clark.
Who's Cameron?
She does the best organic grass-fed dairy farm right off the Catamount Center in Williston, right above,
Oh,
right up the hill. We go up Route 2. She just does an absolute phenomenal job, and she is my hero. And she threatens to hit me every time I say that, but she is. Yeah.
right, good.
Good.
Okay. So it's Thursday already. We will be on the floor, I think, for a while today, so there won't be any question about, do we need to come back to committee by the time we're done? I think everybody will be ready to
How late did it go yesterday?
fix.
Is
A
that?
little after 6, like 6:15 maybe.
I think today, I'm not sure if we've
I think it's supposed to be 4 hours today.
4 hours, okay, so maybe not as long.
Yeah, never mind.
Amendments, yeah.
Yeah, and
That's the
tomorrow,
last question.
tomorrow morning could also be long, I don't know. We've got, the first testimony we have is at 11:15. It's Ben and Jerry's. They were here last week downstairs. They had a table in the card room. And somebody asked me whether they would be welcome to come in at some point, and I said, certainly. So they just wanted to update us on, their business, and since they source from Vermont farms, it seemed like, that would be fine.
Who is it? Is
It's
it?
actually Ben and Jerry,
What's that?
as long as it's actually.
Actual Ben and Jerry, yeah, right.
Well, yeah, because they're sort of at odds with Unilever, Ben and Jerry's at the moment.
Yeah, right, there's interesting things going on with their governance. If we run late, if we happen to run, till lunchtime, I think we will just postpone that rather than try and have them in the afternoon, because we've got the afternoon blocked off right now to have Mike O'Grady walk through these bills. And in addition, S60, which is the Senate bill that sets up the Farm Relief Fund, he's going to walk us through that. And we'll have this bill reporter from the Senate also come in and tell us about it. It's very similar to the bill that we have on our wall, the House bill that we took a little testimony on. I guess we didn't take testimony on it really. We had the introduction. So I'll ask Mike if he can give us a comparison of those two bills. I think one thing that the House bill did, that the Senate bill doesn't do, is include forest product logging. And so that's just something to be aware of. And I think that will probably get us through tomorrow. We will do a little, well, we've got some time to decide for committee discussion, but it won't be a late day tomorrow. We won't be here late in the afternoon.
Dave, the language, since I assume it came from the agency that was in the Senate miscellaneous, is there a foreseen home for that? Because usually the agency would like this stuff, passed.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, in this case, that language is language that was intended to satisfy the EPA. So I have not gotten an update, so I don't know the answer. Yeah. Yeah, and except to say that I don't know with the crossover dates for, there are some exceptions to crossover dates this year. There's always a week exception for the money bills. But I don't think we're going to get another bill this Senate. I think that's it. Good. Anybody have anything else? Hey, Sean.
Yeah, this isn't about content, but I've noticed some other committees have already gotten it together to have a committee supper. And I like the idea of doing a committee supper, so I hope we think about it, because feels like the session is just plugging away and
And before we know it, we'll be wrapping up.
Yeah.
I think once we're through sugaring season and lambing season, it's easier to get.
Planting.
Yeah, we
Is
move
that
immediately
something
into,
day or something?
yeah.
Okay.
But no, I think and we can go offline, but the world doesn't need to know about our here.
Okay.